The sound of shattering glass at 2 in the morning is not something you forget. I was dead asleep when it happened, jolted up like I'd been punched in the chest. I ran to the front of the house, barefoot, hard hammering, and found my living room window obliterated glass sprayed across the hardwood like ice shards. And standing out there on my lawn, in a hideous floral robe and holding a landscaping rock like it was a trophy, was Karen. Her real name is Loretta Calloway, but everyone in the neighborhood just calls her Karen behind her back and sometimes to her face. She's the president of the Crescent Hills HOA, and if there's one thing that woman loves more than her tiny dog and a stroller, it's power. I'd gotten into it with her before, but this was a whole new level of psycho. "You owe the HOA dues, Xavier," she shouted, waving the rock like she was Lady Justice. "You think you can just ignore the rules? You just broke my damn window." I yelled back, stepping over glass, trying not to slice my feet open. "Are you out of your mind?" She didn't even flinch. Just huffed, then turned on her slippered heel and marched back to her house like she hadn't just committed a felony. I stood there stunned, staring at the wreckage and wondering how the hell a woman like that ended up running anything. My name's Xavier Prescott, by the way. I'm a mechanic, divorced, and not exactly the HOA's ideal resident because I have the audacity to park my work truck in my own driveway. This all started 3 months ago when I switched banks, and an auto payment for the HOA fees didn't go through. I missed one quarter less than $300. I didn't even know until I got a nasty letter from Loretta taped to my door, written in Comic Sans, with phrases like delinquent member and immediate legal action. I paid it the next day and thought that was the end of it. But Karen, Loretta doesn't let things go. She started sending fines for ridiculous things. Grass half an inch too tall. My trash bin being visible for 35 minutes after pickup. A suspicious vehicle in my driveway, which turned out to be my brother-in-law's 2002 Civic. Then came the threats, harassment disguised as official communication. I appealed every single fine. I documented everything. I even installed a camera above my garage, mostly to protect my tools. Turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did. The day after the window incident, I filed a police report. I gave them the footage crystal clear, high def, full audio. You could hear the crunch of Loretta's slippers on my driveway, hear her mutter, "Let's see how you like this," right before she hurled the rock through my window. When the officer saw the video, he just whistled and said, "Well, that's open and shut." Still, she didn't seem worried. That afternoon, she showed up at my door again, this time with 2 other board members, Greg, who always looks like he's confused by his own existence, and some woman named Patrice who talks like she's narrating a scented candle commercial. Loretta held a clipboard and said, "We're placing a lien on your property due to unpaid dues and fines totaling $1,700. I stared at her. First of all, no, you're not. Second, I paid the dues. And third, you're about to be arrested for felony vandalism. Her face turned a shade of red I didn't know existed. That video won't hold in court. You provoked me. You've been antagonizing this entire community. I literally have footage of you saying, 'Let's see how you like this,' before you smashed my window." Greg blinked. "Wait," she said that. "Shut up, Greg," Loretta snapped. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. I had already forwarded the footage to my lawyer friend, Marcus, who owed me a favor from way back when I rebuilt his transmission for free. He said it was textbook harassment and criminal mischief, possibly even abuse of power, depending on if she used HOA funds or resources in any of her little vendettas. The next week was chaos. Loretta doubled down. She sent out a mass email to the neighborhood claiming I was a threat to community peace and that I was under investigation. She even tried to get my home labeled a nuisance property. But the thing is, neighbors talk, and most of them already hated her. An older couple from 3 houses down, Jim and Carol, came by with a folder full of their own complaints. Turns out, she'd fined them for their Halloween decorations last year. Another neighbor, a nurse named Lexi, had security footage of Loretta snooping around backyards in the middle of the night under the guise of compliance checks. I started collecting everything. Every letter, every email, every bogus fine. I made copies. I filed a restraining order, and the court granted it within 3 days thanks to the video evidence. She wasn't allowed within 30 feet of my property, which made her HOA patrols a little tricky. That's when she snapped. A week after the restraining order was issued, I caught her standing on the sidewalk across from my house, glaring at me like I'd burned her begonias. She shouted, "You think this is over? You think you can hide behind the law? I just held up my phone, recording again. You're violating the restraining order right now. Keep talking. She stormed off, but that was the beginning of the end. I wasn't the only one she'd gone after. I was just the first one to fight back with proof. Within days, neighbors started banding together. We formed a little group chat. Well, not me personally. Lexi handled that part and started swapping stories. Turns out, Loretta had been abusing her position for years, finding people for things that weren't in the bylaws, pocketing administrative fees, even using HOA funds to pay for her fancy landscaping. We got receipts. By the time the police showed up again, it wasn't just my broken window on the report. It was embezzlement, harassment, vandalism, and violating a court order. But even then, she had the audacity to act like she was the victim. "You're destroying this community," she screamed as they handcuffed her on her front lawn. "No," I said, arms crossed, watching from my porch. "You did that all by yourself." The first HOA meeting after Loretta's arrest was held in the community clubhouse, a beige stucco building that usually smelled like expired potpourri and stale coffee. That evening, though, it had the buzz of a courtroom. Folding chairs were packed tight with residents, many of whom had never shown up before. Some brought clipboards. Others, like me, brought manila folders full of documents. Nobody smiled. At the front of the room, the remaining two board members, Greg and Patrice, looked like they wanted to melt into their seats. They hadn't expected the turnout. I sat near the back, arms folded, listening as murmurs of frustration bubbled around me. Greg cleared his throat. "We want to thank everyone for showing up. This is a transitional time for the HOA." A woman near the front, with a baby on her hip and paint flecks still on her jeans, raised her hand. "Are we going to talk about where all the money went? Or are we pretending Loretta didn't just get arrested outside her house in a SpongeBob robe?" Gasps and a few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Greg tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "We're conducting an internal audit," he said. "We'll be releasing a report soon." Lexi stood up, arms crossed. "No offense, Greg, but I don't trust anything with the word internal right now. We need an independent review, and we want to see every expense Loretta approved in the past 3 years." Patrice finally spoke, voice trembling. "We were just as blindsided by all this as you were." I stood. "No, you weren't." Heads turned. I held up a printed email. "This is from March. Patrice, you signed off on a reimbursement to Loretta for community relations supplies over $400. That was for her personal flower bed, the one with the imported lavender." Patrice's jaw twitched. "She told me it was for the clubhouse landscaping refresh. She also told the city she was on a security committee that doesn't exist, and used that to justify installing cameras pointed directly at people's front doors." The room erupted into voices, accusations, questions, demands. Greg flailed to regain control, banging a water bottle on the table like a gavel. Okay. Let's not turn this into a witch hunt." From the back, Jim called out, "Too late. We've already found the witch." That meeting ended with a unanimous vote to suspend all HOA enforcement actions until an emergency election could be held. I left with a headache, but for the first time in years, it felt like something was actually shifting. 3 days later, I got a call from Marcus. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always," I said, setting down a carburetor I'd been working on. "The DA's office reached out. They're looking into expanding the charges. Financial crimes unit is involved now." I wiped my hands on a rag. "What are we talking?" He paused. "Fraud. Possibly wire fraud. Loretta rerouted a portion of HOA dues into a personal account. They think she used HOA funds to pay off a private contractor who never actually performed any work. But here's the kicker: she listed the payments as safety compliance consultation fees. Wasn't she the one who kept saying we should be lucky she worked pro bono? Yep. Turns out she was paying herself under a fake business name. Filed it under LC Community Solutions, her initials. I exhaled slowly. So how deep does this go? She's looking at restitution, felony charges, the whole nine. If they prove intent and pattern, she's not walking away with probation. That night, I went over to Jim and Carol's place. Their dining table was covered in files, neatly labeled and color-coded. Carol had even tagged each fine she'd received with sticky notes that had dates, times, and a brief summary of why they were bogus. She fined us for having a wind chime. Said it violated noise ordinances, Jim said, sliding the stack toward me. I raised an eyebrow. You guys live across from a high school football field. Carol laughed, but there was no humor in it. She just didn't like us. That's all it ever was. We added it to the growing archive. By the weekend, we had over 20 residents contributing. Lexi had created a timeline, complete with receipts, video clips, and a printout from the county showing that Loretta had claimed over $20,000 in community upgrades that never happened. What finally broke the dam was a letter from a former board member, an older man named Harold, who had resigned 2 years ago. He kept quiet because he didn't want to get involved, but after hearing about the arrest, he sent a notarized statement to the DA's office detailing how Loretta manipulated board votes. She'd allegedly threatened to fine Harold's daughter, who lived in the neighborhood, unless he voted to approve a special assessment fee that ended up in her personal account. That was the nail in the coffin. The DA added charges of coercion and misappropriation of funds. Loretta was formally indicted, and the court ordered a forensic audit of the HOA's finances. A special election was scheduled for the following month. I didn't plan on running, but people kept stopping me on the street, asking me to consider it. "You've already done more for this place than anyone else," Lexi said one evening, handing me a petition with over 50 signatures. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. Meanwhile, the restraining order remained in place, and Loretta's bail conditions barred her from any HOA-related activity. Still, she tried to send letters to board members through her sister, who showed up one day with a manila envelope and was promptly turned away. Patrice resigned quietly. Greg stayed on, but only until the election. He apologized to several residents individually, including me. "I didn't know half of what she was doing," he said outside the clubhouse one evening. "I just signed what she put in front of me." I shrugged. "Then maybe don't sign things without reading them." He nodded. "Yeah, lesson learned." The day of Loretta's preliminary hearing, the courtroom was packed. I sat behind the prosecution's table, along with several other residents. Loretta appeared in a gray suit, hair flat, expression unreadable. The charges were read aloud: 8 counts of fraud, 2 of harassment, and 1 count of criminal mischief for the window incident. She pled not guilty. Her lawyer argued that she had been under stress, that she never intended to harm anyone, and that the HOA's structure lacked oversight, allowing for administrative confusion. But the judge wasn't buying it. "The evidence presented shows a pattern of deliberate abuse of authority," she said. "This was not confusion. This was calculated." Loretta was released pending trial but had to surrender her passport and wear an ankle monitor. Her house, the biggest one on the block, sat dark for weeks. No one watered the plants. The mailbox overflowed. Her little dog was gone, taken by a relative, I assumed. The next HOA meeting was held without her, and for the first time in years, there was laughter. People brought snacks. Kids played outside while their parents voted on new board candidates. I didn't end up running. Lexi did. So did Jim. They both won. As for me, I stuck to what I knew: engines, gears, and brake pads. But every so often, I'd get a knock on the garage door from a neighbor asking for advice on bylaws or legal procedures. I'd help when I could. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was healing. And Loretta? She had a long road ahead of her: court dates, restitution, and a community that would never forget what she did. Funny thing is, she always said she was protecting the neighborhood. Turns out, the neighborhood needed protection from her. The trial date was set for early spring. The court calendar put it right after a high-profile embezzlement case downtown, and Loretta's name ended up plastered in local papers alongside headlines about city corruption and white-collar crime. It wasn't lost on anyone in Crescent Hills that she was being treated like a serious offender. Not because of the broken window, that charge was practically a footnote now, but because of what the forensic audit had unearthed since her arrest. It turned out Loretta hadn't just misused HOA funds for a few landscaping indulgences. She'd orchestrated a full-blown kickback scheme with a shell company registered in her cousin's name. The so-called maintenance vendor had billed the HOA for monthly inspections, pest control, and irrigation repairs that never happened. Over the course of 4 years, they'd siphoned nearly $78,000 from the association's budget. The sheriff's department raided her cousin's business address, which turned out to be a rusted-out storage unit on the edge of town with nothing inside but a folding table and a stack of blank invoices. When the DA's office cross-referenced the payment trail, they discovered Loretta had personally signed off on every single check. Her cousin, who had a record for tax fraud in another county, folded under questioning and agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. The news hit our neighborhood like a thunderclap. People stopped pretending it was just some overzealous HOA president with a control issue. She was a thief, a manipulator, and if the DA's new charges stuck, a felon. Lexi called a community meeting not in the clubhouse this time, but at the local library's conference room, just to make a point that we were done tolerating anything tied to Loretta's reign. Over 40 residents showed up. Jim brought coffee, and Carol passed around printed copies of the latest court filings. I sat near the back, watching as people took turns reading through the documentation. Lexi tapped a chart she'd pinned to the whiteboard. According to the audit, 23% of our annual budget was funneled into fake contracts. Some of those assessments she pushed through? Completely fabricated. That's why we were all paying more over the last few years. A man I'd never spoken to before, probably one of the quieter residents, raised his hand. He looked tired, like someone who'd stayed quiet too long and finally had enough. My wife and I nearly pulled our kids out of school activities because of that last assessment. We thought we'd fallen behind on our mortgage. I had to take weekend shifts just to cover it. Lexi's voice was steady. You weren't behind. Loretta manufactured the shortfall to justify the increase. She submitted false budget projections during board meetings and pressured Greg and Patrice to rubber stamp them. Several people turned toward me. I hadn't said much in the meeting, but I could see it in their eyes, like they were waiting for me to call the next move. I stood up. We've done what we can as a community. The rest is up to the courts now. But if you want real change, we need to build protections into the bylaws. Permanent safeguards. Financial transparency, mandatory third-party audits, clear recall procedures. Otherwise, someone like her can do it all over again. That led to a vote right then and there. A unanimous decision to propose a bylaw overhaul, to be finalized and ratified within 60 days. I volunteered to help draft it, alongside a retired tax attorney named Miss Lorraine, who had just moved into the neighborhood and wasted no time getting involved. She was sharp as a scalpel and had a way of dissecting legal jargon like she was peeling an orange. While the neighborhood worked on rebuilding from the inside, Loretta's legal team scrambled. They filed a motion to dismiss the fraud charges, claiming the HOA had consented to the expenditures and that board approval constituted implicit authorization. The judge rejected the motion, citing evidence that Loretta had misrepresented the nature of the expenses and deliberately concealed transactions from the larger membership. Marcus called me the night after the hearing. She's cooked, he said. The DA's offering a plea deal: 10 years probation, full restitution, and no prison if she cooperates. But they're not dropping the felony charges. I leaned against my kitchen counter. She won't take it. She still thinks she can talk her way out of this. Then she's going to trial. And if the jury sees that footage of her smashing your window and hears the rest, she won't get a sympathetic ear. Good. 2 weeks before the trial, something unexpected happened. A former city inspector named Calhoun came forward with a sworn affidavit. He claimed Loretta had bribed him with cash and gift cards to overlook code violations on her own property and to issue citations against neighbors she didn't like. He kept quiet for years, but after learning about the fraud investigation, he decided to come clean. The DA added bribery and official misconduct to the list of charges. Loretta's legal team tried to suppress the affidavit, but the judge ruled it admissible. That's when they finally cracked. She took the plea deal. The terms were brutal. Full restitution to the HOA, a 10-year ban from holding any office or administrative position in an association, 6 months of house arrest, and 3 years of supervised probation. She was also required to participate in a public restitution hearing where she would read a statement acknowledging her actions. The hearing was held on a damp Wednesday morning. I showed up wearing my work boots and an old jacket, standing in the back of the chamber as Loretta shuffled to the podium in front of a full room. Residents filled every seat. Some stood along the walls. Even the local paper sent a reporter. The prosecutor prompted her to begin. Loretta's voice was thin, like paper tearing. I acknowledged that my actions as president of the Crescent Hills HOA caused financial harm, emotional distress, and a loss of trust within the community. I manipulated my authority, concealed financial transactions, and used my position for personal gain. I accept full responsibility. Not a single person clapped. No one nodded. It wasn't a moment of closure, it was a public accounting. And it was long overdue. After the hearing, I walked out into the drizzle. Lexi caught up with me in the parking lot. Think she meant it? She asked. No. But that's not what matters. She nodded slowly, then pulled out a folded paper from her coat pocket. We finished the bylaw revisions. Want to take a look? I took it and flipped through the first few pages, skimming the new provisions. Mandatory quarterly financial reports. Term limits. Recall procedures that didn't require board approval. A neighborhood oversight committee elected by residents, not appointed. It was everything we should have had from the start. I like it, I said. Let's get it passed. That weekend, we held a community vote at the park. Lawn chairs and folding tables lined the grass. Someone brought a grill, and someone else brought a speaker playing jazz. Kids ran around while their parents signed ballots. We tallied the votes right there in the open. The reforms passed with 98% in favor. 2 people abstained. No one voted against. Greg moved out a few weeks later. Patrice had already gone quiet and sold her home. The new board was elected without drama. Lexi as president, Jim as treasurer, and Miss Lorraine as secretary. They kept things simple, transparent, and fair. As for me, I went back to fixing engines and keeping my head down. But people still knocked on my door with questions. Not about fines or complaints anymore, just advice. How to file a petition, where to find public records, who to call at City Hall when the streetlights stayed out too long. The HOA was no longer a threat. It was just a group of neighbors trying to keep things running. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. And Loretta? She was just a name in the court docket now, stripped of power and status, reduced to a cautionary tale. Sometimes I'd still find a loose shard of glass near the edge of the living room floor, a remnant from that night she threw the rock. I never cleaned them all. Not on purpose. Just left a few in the corners as a reminder. Power unchecked always breaks something. But justice, when it finally lands, rebuilds everything stronger. It was 6 weeks after the restitution hearing when a certified letter arrived at my house. I just finished swapping out the rear suspension on a '98 Silverado, hands still stained with grease, when I spotted the envelope wedged between a coupon flyer and a water bill. The return address was the county clerk's office. I opened it with a screwdriver, too tired to look for a letter opener. Inside was a summons not for court, but for a community impact statement hearing. The judge overseeing Loretta's sentencing wanted official testimonies about how her actions had affected residents. They were compiling a record to determine whether the plea deal's penalties were sufficient or if adjustments were warranted. I didn't know that was even possible. Apparently, in cases involving large-scale financial misconduct tied to quasi-governmental roles like HOA leadership, the court had the discretion to revisit terms based on community harm. That night, I called Lexi. I got one too, she said. So did Miss Lorraine. Carol's planning to testify in person. I leaned against the kitchen counter, phone tucked between my shoulder and ear. You think it'll change anything? I think it's the last door we get to close. Might as well walk through it. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and word spread fast. Residents who'd never spoken at meetings before started emailing the clerk's office, asking how to submit statements. Some of them were heartbreaking. A single mom who'd been fined for putting up a temporary carport while her garage was under repair, a disabled veteran who'd been forced to remove his accessibility ramp because it disrupted visual flow, a family who moved out early just to escape the constant threats. The courtroom that day was at capacity by 9:30 in the morning. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a patient cadence, allowed each resident 5 minutes. No crosstalk, no interruptions. Just raw, uninterrupted truth. Carol went first. Her voice didn't shake once. She made us question whether we were safe in our own homes. Not from crime, but from the very people who were supposed to be looking out for us. A man in a faded Union jacket spoke next. He described how Loretta had falsified a complaint about his backyard fire pit, leading to a visit from the fire marshal and a citation that cost him nearly a week's pay. Each testimony chipped away at the carefully constructed image Loretta had tried to maintain. Dignified, dutiful, just misunderstood. But what emerged was something else entirely systemic, calculated, and cruel. When it was my turn, I walked up with the same folder I'd used when I first filed the police report, the one with the broken window photos, the time-stamped footage, and the stack of fabricated fines. She weaponized bureaucracy, I said. She turned paperwork into a bludgeon and wielded it against anyone who didn't fit her idea of control. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The judge thanked me, then asked if that was the full extent of my statement. No, I said. There's one more thing. I reached into the folder and pulled out an invoice marked Emergency Infrastructure Assessment. It was dated 2 years ago and bore Loretta's signature. The amount was just under $10,000. But the company listed Wexley Urban Systems didn't exist. I checked with the Secretary of State's office the night before. The judge frowned. This was not submitted with the original evidence packet. No, Your Honor. I found it last week in a neighbor's old HOA file. He was cleaning out his garage. She motioned for the bailiff to collect the document. I believe this qualifies as new material evidence, she said. We'll recess for review. The courtroom emptied into the hallway like a shaken soda can. Lexi caught up with me near the elevators. You've been holding out on us, she said. I wasn't sure what it meant until I dug into the vendor registry. Once I realized it was another ghost contractor. She nodded. That makes it 5. 5 fake companies. 6, I corrected. There's a 6th listed under a different address, but the EIN traces back to the same post office box. 2 days later, an emergency judicial review was announced. The court reopened Loretta's sentencing under a new fraud enhancement clause. The DA filed a motion to revoke her house arrest privileges, citing failure to fully disclose the scope of her financial crimes. The judge agreed. Loretta was taken into custody the same afternoon. She appeared at the next hearing in a beige jumpsuit, no makeup, wrists cuffed. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her amended sentence, 24 months in state prison, followed by 3 years probation and full restitution totaling over $130,000. If she defaulted on any payment, a lien would be placed on her property and the home would be auctioned to cover losses. I have no words, Loretta said quietly. Only regret. But no one clapped. No one nodded. The only sound was the bailiff's order to rise as she was led away. After the hearing, the community didn't celebrate. It wasn't a victory parade. It was relief, quiet, heavy, and well-earned. For months, we lived with the weight of her influence pressing down on every interaction, every complaint, every late payment. Now, it was gone. The HOA held a special gathering the following weekend, not a meeting, not a vote, just a potluck at the neighborhood park. Someone brought folding tables. Someone else brought a karaoke machine that mercifully broke within the first 10 minutes. No one minded. We were there to breathe. Jim passed around a clipboard with volunteer roles for the new oversight committee. Miss Lorraine announced the final draft of the bylaws had been filed with the county and was now legally binding. Lexi handed out updated contact cards for the board, each one listing a personal cell number. I stayed near the grill, flipping hot dogs and listening to the sound of kids laughing without being told their sidewalk chalk violated visual uniformity standards. At one point, Greg showed up. He looked different. Not nervous, just neutral. He didn't stay long, but before he left, he walked over to me. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, he said. Just wanted to say thanks for not letting it slide. I nodded. You planning to stay in Crescent Hills? No. I sold the house. Figured it was time for a clean break. I didn't ask where he was going. It didn't matter. After he left, Carol came up beside me with a paper plate stacked high with brownies. Looks like you're finally off the HOA's most wanted list, she said. I think they replaced me with a squirrel that keeps eating someone's bird feeder. Good. You deserve the break. For the first time in over a year, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again, imperfect, unpredictable, but ours. Later that week, I pulled the last of the broken glass from beneath the floor vent in my living room. I stared at the shard for a long time before tossing it in the trash. The cameras stayed up. Not because I expected trouble, but because I learned something valuable. Trust is earned, not assumed. And it's worth protecting. Loretta's house went up for auction 3 months later. A young couple bought it. They planted sunflowers where her imported lavender used to be. No one told them they needed architectural approval. No one ever would again. And that was the real one, not the sentencing, not the reforms, not even the financial restitution. It was the silence. The kind that didn't feel like fear anymore. The kind that meant peace.